This episode is sponsored by Team Builder, yet another company that's doing great things for the first responder community. As a strength and conditioning coach myself who also trains tactical athletes, dissemination of wellness information is one of the biggest challenges. Now, Team Builder is the premier strength and conditioning software for tactical athletes, and there are several features that really impress me. Firstly, there is a full exercise library, so you, the personal trainer, does not have to create that within your own department. Secondly, you can send out programming, but also individualize, which I love. So you blanket program for everyone. Now you can tweak based on someone's injury, someone's need to maybe drop some body composition, rather than having to write a program for every single person on their own. Team Builder also allows you to build custom questionnaires to collate health and wellness data. It integrates with wearables. And I think one of the most important things is obviously it tracks. To me, it's imperative that we as a profession start tracking our people from day one and then over the full span of their career, therefore catching potential wellness issues and injuries before they happen. Now, if you want to try Team Builder, they are offering you, the audience of the Behind the Shield podcast, a free 14-day trial to experience all of the features. And if you want to take a deeper dive into Team Builder, listen to episode 1032 with Melissa Mercado, or go to teambuilder.com. And I'll spell that to you because it's not as you'd think, TEAMBUILDR.com. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show Vietnam veteran, former law enforcement officer, and the author of Honorable Intentions, Russell Jones. Now, Russell is definitely one of the most interesting people I've had on the show, and I say that because of the diverse spectrum of his career. From flying helicopters in Vietnam, to working as a police officer in California, then undercover intelligence all over the world, including being part of the team that uncovered Operation Tipped Kettle, riding with the Hells Angels, working as a forensic expert in the psychological and physiological effects of drugs and alcohol, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of well over 1,100 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So that being said, I introduce to you Russell Jones. Enjoy. Well, Russell, I want to start by saying thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Absolutely. It's my honor to be here. I look forward to this.
So where on planet Earth are we finding you this afternoon?
I'm in the sunny, wonderful, beautiful rolling hills in Texas on the Guadalupe River, right where all the drama was a couple of weeks ago.
Well, talk to me about that as a resident in that area. You know, what were some of the sad stories you heard, and then some of the stories of heroism from someone who's literally in that area?
Well, we're downstream from Canyon Dam, and the flooding was upstream. So we just knew we had a lot of rain. We woke up July 4th thinking the day was normal. And then, of course, started hearing all the news. And I really don't know anymore. We didn't see anything here. We're less than an hour away, but you knew not to drive up there. You were just going to be in the way. And so we didn't know any more about it than you did on the news.
Gotcha.
And, of course, lots of story of heroism. Sadly, though, a loss of life.
I was talking to one of my kind of, I say friends, people that I'm connected with online, and he was literally at Guadalupe River as we were speaking with the USAR team, searching for people. And I think a lot of times it seems like the media numbers are woefully underreported. I know they're still missing tens of people, I believe, at the moment. So it's so sad. If you watch the footage of the river dams breaking and then just rising through some of these cities, it's absolutely heartbreaking. There's no wonder so many people were lost because it was, instantaneous almost.
It's sad, and people not following protocol for situations like that. We have a early warning system, and the Weather Service put out plenty of warnings that there were going to be storms and flooding. But one of the problems is we hear this again and again and again. Every time there's a rainstorm coming, we get told possible flooding, low water crossings, and it pretty soon it becomes kind of you hear it, but it just goes in one ear and out the other, as the old saying goes. And then, of course, this time the warnings were correct.
I was literally having this conversation yesterday with a group of men that I coach, and there's women too, at the gym. And this particular afternoon, we had a Florida storm blow in. So one minute we're pushing metal sleds around. The next minute, lightning's hitting the cell phone tower a few hundred feet away. And we're like, okay, we need to not be pushing metal sleds around now. But it's the same thing. I mean, you get these hurricanes come in and all these, weather personalities. I don't even know how well versed they are in meteorology, but they become this kind of icon during the hurricane, and there's kind of fear mongering going on. And I think sometimes we get way too much information rather than when it's deemed truly necessary. Then you give these reports rather than this kind of there might be something coming, because it just numbs people to the reality of something really serious.
Exactly. The news dramatizes. Of course, they want you to watch and read, so they dramatize it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's go to the very beginning of your timeline. You have pretty incredible kind of life story. So tell me where you were born, and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
I was born in the San Francisco, San Jose Bay Area. A little background before that, though. My father was stationed at Camp Rucker, Alabama, and Sunday afternoon they weren't training. He was a sergeant training advanced infantry, and Sunday afternoon nothing going on, but of course the attack on Pearl Harbor occurred. My dad used to say a lot of drama, getting everybody ready. Their whole division was to be loaded up on train, sent to New York, from New York to the South Pacific. My father's company, and just his company, got misplaced on the train, and they ended up in California. And the Army didn't have time to fool with them. This was the beginning of the war. The Army had other things to do. So my dad and his company bivouacked in downtown San Jose, St. James Park, until they finally sent them to Camp Roberts or Hunter Leggett, which is in the Monterey area of California, where they began training replacements. But it was because of that my father was introduced to. He was born and raised in Tennessee, very poor. He had never experienced California otherwise, but kind of like I like to call it the broken shoelace theory, or the sliding door theory, but for this little innocuous event, how your life can go different directions. How this little innocuous event, my dad never saw action in World War II, obviously, therefore wasn't wounded, and came back and settled in California, where I was born. So we were in San Jose until I was about kindergarten. But I remember watching my father ride to work on a bicycle. He dug trenches and ditches, septic tanks by hand back then. And around 6 or so, when we moved to Los Gatos, And Los Gatos, Saratoga, Campbell, that's where I was raised for the rest of my life. Grew up. And my dad began his own pest control service. Finally got a pickup. I remember it was an old yellow beat up 40s yellow pickup. Started his own pest control business, and from there he became very successful. But he was also very involved in the Baptist church, and he became an ordained minister. And when I was 12, 13 range, well, when I was supposed to be in 7th and 8th grade, we were missionaries in Recife, Brazil, helping to establish a girls' orphanage. So I never went to junior high school, which I regret because I missed out on a lot of youth sports and things like that in those development years. But when we returned from missionary work, I entered my freshman year of high school, and we attended church. Everything was church. The church made sure that they had an activity going on the same night the schools were having activities. So we had Boys Brigade instead of being able to go to Boy Scouts. The church was always going skating or miniature golf anytime the school was having a school dance. So wasn't active in high school, didn't really know a lot of people in high school. I think socially, that hurt a little bit, not growing up, being active in school and everything. Unsupervised, I was always in trouble, constantly in trouble. Before we moved from San Jose, there was Santana Row today is a huge shopping center. Well, back in the early 50s, it was a big grass field. And I, playing with matches, making a fort, I started that field on fire. And fire engines came, and of course, someone saw me scooting home, so I got caught. The only time I got caught, by the way, in my shenanigans. In today's world, I would have been maybe still diagnosed ADHD. I disagree with the trend today in pathologizing personalities, but yeah, what do we have? 300 disorders in the DSM today. The first edition had 106. So over that short period of time, they keep adding. We're diagnosing personalities, and is one of my complaints about that. Exacerbating medical treatment. You know, I can remember the satanic cult panic in the 80s. 12,000 unsubstantiated cases were reported back then. What else? We had other things. Dissociative disorders, multiple personalities. That was a big deal back in the 90s. Growing up in high school, not a good student. I couldn't sit still. I needed to be doing things. And I used to make pipe bombs. Back then in the early 60s, I could ride my bicycle into Los Gatos, go to a pharmacy, and buy everything I needed to make pipe bombs. All the ingredients, which they carried in pharmacies today. Pharmacies are completely different today. But, you know, I got potassium nitrate, sulfur, powdered charcoal. I'd roll it out in a wet mixture, and I would dry it in my mom's oven in the house. Are you kidding? I look back and go, are you kidding? I'd make pipe bombs. Just take a 6-inch piece of pipe, put a cap on one end. The other cap, I'd drill a hole in it for a fuse, fill it with my homemade my homemade gunpowder. I'd go out in the orchard. We lived on 5 acres of orchards, mostly prune, but we had peach, cherry, plums, apricots. But I'd find an old dead prune tree, and I'd bury that pipe, and of course I'd blow it up, and I had a lot of fun. It was great. One of my other fun things to do is I learned how to make hydrogen at home. And I'd take a large Coke bottle, and I'd make the hydrogen in that Coke bottle and then put a large balloon on the top. And as the hydrogen filled up the balloon, when it got full, I'd tie it off. and then I'd attach a fuse to it, and then I'd let it go in the neighborhood, and it'd get up about 100, 200 feet, and of course explode in this big cumulus billowing cloud of fire with a loud roar, rump. Of course, the neighbors would see it. They'd call in the cops. The cops would come in looking to find out what's going on. Did you see anything? Just had fun. It was just blowing things up, causing trouble. Graduated from high school, just C's, just a solid C student. And so when I entered West Valley College, which was there in Campbell, California, I had no clue what I wanted to do. But John Morgan, great guy, Chief John Morgan at Campbell Police Department, ran the Administration of Justice program. And he talked me into going into the Admin of Justice program, and I loved it. A's and B's, solid A's and B's. But I had graduated high school at only 17. So when I graduated 2 years of college, I was only 19. I was a long way away from being able to be hired by a police department. A lot of my buddies that were with me, Dan Jensen, Roger Malcolm, Mitch Handa, those guys, they were within a year of being able to be hired. And so they were able to start the testing program, go through what needed to be done. I had already had my pilot's license. I'd gotten my pilot's license the same year I got my driver's license, and first in gliders, then fixed wings. So I wanted to go. I knew I was going to get drafted. It's at that age, something's going to come up. So I went to the Air Force. I went to the Navy, and they said, "No, you need a 4-year degree." So then I went to the Army, and I went in to the Army recruiting, and I said, "How about military police?" I got a 2-year degree in Administration of Justice. And they said, yeah, and they start putting out the paperwork because they're anxious to sign someone up. And I noticed a poster on the wall, Army helicopters. I said, do I need 4-year degree to fly Army helicopters? They said, oh no, 2-year degree and you're already a pilot. Again, they're all anxious. We test on Saturday, get you signed up. So off to Mineral Wells, Texas for primary helicopter school. Then we had Fort Rucker, Camp Rucker, back when my dad was in the Army. It's now Fort Rucker, home of Army Aviation, but went through Fort Rucker, Alabama, graduated as a warrant officer, helicopter pilot. I married Susan, high school sweetheart, and then I was off to Vietnam. There we go. Excitement, blowing things up, shooting things. I was looking forward to it. I was assigned to the 196 Light Infantry Brigade, and that was part of the Americal Division. And our aviation unit had only 4 helicopters, 2 Hueys and 2 LOHs. And the LOHs were scout helicopters going back, or small helicopters that dated back to the Korean War. I wasn't real excited about that I was going to be flying those, but we flew command and control for the brigade commander. We flew action transmissions with the Hueys. With the OH-23s, we flew liaison personnel because you could only carry 1 or 2 passengers between division headquarters, brigade, or up to the Korean unit, or up to the 1st MAR Division, which we bordered up there just south of Da Nang. But we had one assignment that I loved. I volunteered for it every time I could, and we flew scouts for the 1st MARDIV. So we'd spend a whole week up at the 1st MARDIV, and we were looking for those 122 millimeter rocket sites. And those are the rockets that they can fire from quite a distance away. They'd land on the airports. They would land in town. They were pretty indiscriminate about where they would land, but so I love that mission. Low level, I mean, as low as you can get to the ground, in between bushes, hopping over tree lines, caught and dispatched Viet Cong on numerous occasions, sometimes even NVA soldiers. someone asked me recently, what's it like to kill someone? And I'd never been asked that before. When you're first in combat, it's stressful, but it's exciting. Guys like me, it was exciting. There's nothing more thrilling for a guy like me to be shot at and missed. It's great. And I love the combat. So for me, when I had to dispatch, take out a VC or an MBA, I was killing someone who was going to harm other American soldiers if I didn't take him out. That's the way I looked at it. Other occasions, they're shooting at you, you're shooting at them, you got a heck of a gunfight going on, and so you're returning fire. You're protecting yourself, you're defending yourself, and of course, the enemy ends up getting killed. But how do you describe an enemy soldier that is in a small area of bushes, and you catch him, so he starts shooting at you, you shoot back, gunfire, dirt and dust flying up. All of a sudden he gets up and he runs away and he doesn't have his weapon. But he seems to be carrying something in his arm. And it seems to be dragging behind him like a big rope. And when you swoop in again to finish off, you realize he's carrying his intestines. You're sick. The nauseous feeling that floods your body. I mean, there's a form of stress. It's not easy sitting over dinner to describe these events, which is probably why a lot of people who've been in combat, their family complains, well, he never talks about it. Well, that's why. I had an epiphany. About 9 months in, I was beginning to sense the futility of that war, which, by the way, was measured not by territory seized, not the way World War II was fought or the Korean War was fought, but it was a war of attrition. In 1800s, Karl von Clausewitz, he declared that a war of attrition was the pit of hell. So around in February '69, I was flying scouts for the 1st Marine Division south of Marble Mountain. I caught a whole squad of NVA who were sneaking up to attack a Marine patrol unit. Once we knew where they were at, they shot at us. We fired back. We eventually killed 4 and wounded 1, which we took prisoner. When I visually cleared the area out, I did as I usually do. I landed and took all the weapons off the prisoners. And I, of course, looked for paperwork. The weapons were great for trading later for cases of from the Navy guys, cases of steaks and stuff like that. But the NVA lieutenant was dead, but on his person, when I was going through his paperwork, were pictures of his wife and children. And I realized then that the American soldier, I was no different than the French who had been there years before, or the Japanese who had occupied Vietnam during World War II. I was no different than that French soldier. That lieutenant was serving his country honorably. I was the intruder. I was a member of a foreign military invading his country. That epiphany, that realization, I found disturbing and stressful. And I didn't want to fly scouts anymore. I didn't want any more killing. I didn't want any more shooting. And because I had seniority, I was able to be assigned to the Hueys, flying what we call picnic missions. For the rest of my tour, I was down to 2 months left. So on March 7th, 1969, I was made 2 flights. There was a unit, Delta Company 3rd of the 21st, was in heavy combat. They needed medevacs. None were available. I was in the area, so I flew in twice into that hot LZ and in and out, recovered 10 wounded. But on that last mission, we had over 50 holes in the helicopter. I was wounded through the knee, through the calf. My door gunner was wounded bad. In fact, everyone was wounded except my co-pilot. In the Army, we call him aircraft commander and pilot. So Terry was not one of the only one, but we made it back safe, got the wounded off. I immediately had to go into the medevac station and was sent to Da Nang, where they operated on me. They sent me to Camp Zama, Japan, where I recovered a bit, and then I was home. You know, our soldiers in Vietnam served with honor. But what we didn't know at the time was that Vietnam was a failed policy. And after the war, all the major architects, Robert McNamara on down, admitted that the war was a failed policy that resulted in 58,000 deaths. That's a stress. All our soldiers, the stress of knowing that you'd been over there fighting in a war that was a failed policy, that they knew was a failed policy. I was discharged in 1970. Susan and I had a son, Joey, hired by the San Jose Police Department. We had no academy back then. This would be 1970. No academy, no field training program. I was just sworn in by Chief Blackmore, given a badge, and told to go be a cop. I worked a couple of weeks with a partner, a senior officer, and then I was on my own, working a one-man car. And I know guys don't like to hear this. I'm sure it's the same way in the fire department. None of the new guys in the fire department want to hear the stories about how it was back when I was a fireman. We had to pump our water by hand. We worked a one-man car, and we did not have cell radios. We didn't have radios back then. We didn't have cell phones either. So when you got out of your car back then, you were on your own. You handled it. I had rape cases. I arrested armed robbers. I had to step over the crispy bodies of victims from house fires. It was all police work. It's the stress and trauma that comes from police work. I had a hot chase where the suspect hit me with his car, spun around on the road, and came back at me again. He was definitely trying to take me out. And I shot him. He lived. More stress. We were working 10-hour shifts. So we worked 4 days a week, 10 to 8. I worked, because I was low seniority, I worked midnights, 10 to 8. So you'd get off at 10 in the morning. That last night off, you work 4 days. Your last night off, you get off at 8 in the morning. Well, now you stay up all day so that you can get back on the regular cycle. So that's 1 day without sleep. You go to sleep. Then you get 2 good days of sleep. And then you're back at, it's a day to go to work. Well, usually you've got things to do. You're not tired. You stay up all day, and then you show up for work, and you stay up all night. Sleep deprivation. Probably not as serious as it is in the fire department, but for those guys working those night shifts, it's an issue. Two officers killed while I was on NSA, and one was a personal friend, Gordy Silva, and another homeless man who had fallen through the ever widening cracks in society where we find so many people today. It was during that time Nixon had declared the war on drugs, and I, as a police officer, I didn't see any evidence of a drug problem, except for alcohol. I had, early on, I had been working maybe a couple of weeks, one-man car. I had an accident, 2:30, 3 in the morning. A car had hit a telephone pole. And no other cars were involved. I told communications, I'm present, I'm fine, don't look like I need help or anything. Walked up to the driver, and he had eaten the steering wheel. He was all bloody. and he was eyes glazed over. I knew he was drunk, and I look through the window and I see his passenger, and she appeared to be unconscious. So I went around to the passenger side door, opened it up, and she just fell out onto the pavement. And she was wearing a wedding gown. This was the bride and groom. And cars are passing me, honking their horns, blowing, whistling, yelling. They thought I just stopped a car. They didn't even recognize it was the bride and groom. Unfortunately, she passed away. When I went to the hospital, she was already gone. Apparently, she had hit her forehead on the windshield and broken her neck. Sad. I saw more problems with alcohol than I did with drugs. No ifs, ands, or buts. I worked as a canine officer for a while. Then I became a field training officer. We just had started the field training program in San Jose. And by the way, San Jose's police department's FTO program is now the standard across the state of California and with many police departments across the United States. Well, I had barely been on the department 3 years when I was transferred to the narcotics division. And all the talk about the war on drugs, I thought, now here's a war I can sink my teeth into, so to speak. And I was put on the major violator team. We had 3 teams in our narcotics unit. One was what we called the street detail. And that was 3 cops, 3 or 4 cops, I forget how many were on the team. And they were clean cut, but they wore civilian clothes and they drove around in unmarked cars. Their job was to go out and find people who were using drugs, under the influence of drugs, interview people in jail who had been arrested for drugs. Of course, their job was to find someone who would roll over and say, I'll introduce you to my dealer because I don't want to go to jail. The other team was the buy team. And the buy team, they were undercover. And depending on what type of drug they were buying, and by the way, not every undercover cop can buy every kind of drug. It's kind of interesting, but you get your little niches that you're good at. So they would dress appropriately. And they would, if the street detail found someone who would turn informant, then the buy team would take them and they'd go make buys. And of course, they'd try to work themselves up the chain. When they got so far to where it was, they had the potential to really make a big buy, like a pound of cocaine back then, 2 pounds of cocaine, $60,000. They would then come to the major violator team. We were also undercover, looking skanky, but I only dealt with large major cases. And we started making headlines in the San Jose Mercury News right off the bat. Headlines like, and I keep them all, $60,000 in cocaine seized, I had bought drugs and infiltrated the Nuestra Familia and exposed them as a major street gang headquartered in San Jose. We'd have pictures in you've seen them, pictures in the newspaper with a table full of dope, guns, and money, and the chief of police standing back there, and the district attorney standing back there, and they're talking about the major dent they made in the drug narcotics, the network. And we narcotics officers would, standing off to the side, out of view of the cameras, a couple of us would glance at each other and smirk, because we knew that by arresting drug dealers, all we were doing is creating a job opening. And when there's a job opening and there's a fight for it, there's violence, guns, shooting, violence. Everyone wanting to be that next dealer that you just took out. Gang violence due to the war on drugs really began to escalate about 2 or 3 years after we started the war on drugs. It really began to escalate. I had a fellow police officer, Ted, was working the buy team, and he came to me one day and he says, hey, you're good at buying methamphetamine, which, by the way, cocaine and methamphetamine were the two drugs that I was best at. He said, I got this gal, and she says she can take us to a ounce and more dealer of methamphetamine. So I said, well, let's go talk to her. He had her in an interrogation room. So we go off to the interrogation room, and here's this thin, skanky, needle marks all over her, pimples, unwashed hair. And I said, okay, who can you buy from? And she says, well, the reason she wanted to turn, by the way, was to keep her husband out of jail. Ted had bought drugs from him, and he had been in prison before, so he was going away. So she wanted to turn evidence to keep him from going to prison and to keep him local. She started crying and bawling and all this and that. And she says, well, do you know who Bill Perky is? Well, whoa. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up because Bill Perky was the vice president of the San Jose chapter of the Hells Angels. So yes. So I ended up buying, she introduced me. I ended up buying drugs from Bill Perky, amphetamine. But then she introduced me to someone else, this guy named Thornton. Thornton was a Hells Angel wannabe. He dealt a lot of their drugs. And so I came up with this idea. I'm going to flash some automatic handguns, which were just new, by the way. They were just coming out. Law enforcement hadn't even switched over to the 9mm automatics yet. But I checked 2 out of the armory, took him over to his house. I flashed him. He went bonkers, being a typical meth head, running around like a chicken with his head off and flapping his arms and oh wow. So, of course, he mentioned it to the Hells Angels that I could get him guns, which I said I could. And then in another fluke, I had met Dirty Doug Bontempi, a Hells Angel, through another case. So now Dirty Doug has seen me. Bill Perky has seen me. They start inviting me around. So now I'm what's called a hanger-oner. And we'd ride the motorcycles over to a bar and hang out and drink and talk. And there would always be as a group, I never saw them talk drugs or anything like that. They did want to buy guns. I also met Al Pizarro. Altamont Al Pizarro. Altamont, does that ring a bell?
It does here in Florida.
Altamont was in California, the Altamont racetrack. The Rolling Stones did a big concert there in '69. And Hells Angels were hired to do security. And during the Rolling Stones concert, while Mick Jagger's up there on stage, trying to be nice here, a guy made a bad decision and climbed up on the stage with a gun. And Pizarro stabbed him to death. So that was his nickname, Al Pizarro. He was found not guilty, by the way. A jury, they tried to try him for murder, but the jury saw the footage. The whole concert was being filmed. So you see this guy climbing up on stage with a gun. He was found not guilty. I met him. That case went on, I want to say a couple of years. And by the time it was done, working with ATF and some DEA guys, we arrested 33 members of the Hells Angels, one big roundup. And the federal attorneys wanted to do it as a RICO case, which is racketeer influence criminal organization, which I was against because at least from my testimony would be any evidence I had, I didn't see the Hells Angels as an organization committing any crimes. You had all these individuals. In my argument, let's try the individuals. Individually, convict them and sentence them. But trying to do the whole club, I didn't think that was going to work. And guess what? It didn't work. I had no way to tie individual crimes to the Hells Angels, neither did any ATF agent. The RICO case fell apart. The jury hung. But every Hell's Angel that I had personally had a case against, Dirty Doug, Wild Bill, Altamont All, Sergey Walton, Jim Brandes, they were all found guilty. So from my point of view, it was very successful case. Think about working undercover, if we can go there for a minute. Working undercover, riding Harleys, drinking on the job, talking the talk. They want you to walk like a duck, talk like a duck, act like a duck, and pretty soon you become a duck. You're hanging around with these guys, you're swearing, you're drinking more than you normally drink, you're hanging out. The Journal of Police and Criminal Psychology did a qualitative study and found that the secrecy required in undercover assignments leads to high levels of stress and difficulties in maintaining personal relationships. And bingo. Yeah. In the middle of all that, I got divorced. I'm coming home looking like hell, looking like a dirty biker who hasn't bathed in 2 weeks. I stink. I've been drinking. My language has, I've been bringing that language home. So Susan and I, unfortunately, divorced. I married again, Lucy Barunda, but I'm still working undercover, still living in a world of deceit, and was soon divorced again. When I first came into law enforcement, I treated everyone with respect until they proved themselves an asshole. And you reach a point in law enforcement, most cops do, after a few years, where pretty much you initially treat everyone as an asshole until they prove themselves worthy of respect. Pretty soon for me, I remember one night I'm riding through Los Gatos on my Harley, coming home late at night, and I got stopped by a Los Gatos cop. And I remember thinking, what does this asshole want? I mean, even the cops have become assholes to me. Remember one night looking in the mirror. I was single then, second time, single, looking in the mirror after all this. And I looked at myself in the mirror and I saw an asshole. The war on drugs was a failed policy. What I was doing was a failed policy. Didn't feel good about myself. Early in my tour at Narco, if you go way back to the beginning, they put me TDY to the FBI for a few weeks. And I was running around, following up on leads throughout the whole Bay Area, looking for Patty Hearst. And I had studied her picture. I studied the pictures of all the guys who supposedly kidnapped her, she was running around with. So I'd ride around on the Harley, and I'd go up to the home where someone had reported that maybe she was at. And I'd knock on the door, and I'd say, hey, I'm looking for some girl, Sherry, who owes me money. Nothing ever came of that. But other than I came to the attention of the FBI, they liked what I did. And then, of course, the Hells Angels case certainly brought my attention to the FBI. So in 1980, an FBI agent introduced me to a State Department intelligence officer by the name of Siegel. And he wanted me to fly helicopters in South America and gather intel on the Contra War, which was just beginning in Nicaragua. I didn't know much about it, but the Nicaragua War basically was the communists were taking over Nicaragua, and the Contras were fighting, didn't want the communists in there. During President Carter's term, apparently he had really reduced intel capacity throughout all our agencies. And Reagan wanted us involved with the Contras. He wanted them to be funded. State Department, I guess it would be the State Department of Research and Intelligence wanted boots on the ground. And so I said, I'll do it. I want to do it. I like the idea of getting back in a helicopter. I like the idea of a bigger picture, fighting communism down in Central America, much closer to home. So I started going down there. I was considered a NOC, by the way, non-official cover. So I had no ties to anything. It was really important. Well, I'll get in that in a minute, but back up here, the Congress had passed the Bolin amendment, which cut off all the funds for the Reagan administration to the Contras. But Reagan wanted to support the Contras. So the CIA, along with Ollie North's gang, secretly started funding the Contras. They were selling, against international law, they were selling major missiles to Iran, then using that money to support the Contras in their fight against the Sandinistas. And of course, what I wasn't told, being a contract, I was a contract employee. And in intelligence, it's very narrow. Your window of what you get to know or what you're told is very narrow. So I didn't really know. But apparently the CIA was not communicating with the State Department. The State Department wanted to know where all these small arms were coming from. Apparently the Contras were getting AK-47s, they were getting grenades, they were getting handguns. Where were these coming from? So the State Department wanted to know, they wanted to find out how the weapons were being smuggled into Central America. And if you want to know that, then you follow the established drug smuggling routes. And I guess that's where they thought I could come in and be of assistance to them. So I sailed down to Costa Rica, nonstop, San Francisco to Costa Rica, 3 weeks at sea. This was before GPS, by the way, so I'm basically navigating with a sextant, not much more than what Columbus had. And showed up in Costa Rica as a boat bum, a prior Army helicopter pilot, a former cop. Every bit of my story had to be true, except for the one item of talking to Siegel. Every bit had to be true because the guys I was going to be infiltrating down there had the ability to check out my background thoroughly, completely. Not like infiltrating the Hells Angels. These guys had the means. I did some familiarization flights in the helicopter. Never did any missions at all. Flew fixed wing all over the country, though. I traveled around northern Costa Rica on the ground. I met Bill Crone, John Hull, Bruce Jones. All these guys are CIA operatives. Admitted that. I mean, they said they were contract employees for the CIA. In fact, John Hull is very well known. You can Google him and his background with the CIA down during the Iran-Contra thing in Costa Rica. I hang around with a lot of Cuban operatives, guys who were working for Felix Rodriguez, also known as Alex Gomez. He was Bay of Pigs. He was the one who captured Che Guevara. He had flown missions in Vietnam. He joined the Army and became a helicopter pilot and flew. This guy was something else. These Cubans, they were tough guys. They would not have tolerated what I was attempting to find out if they knew. The Cubans arranged a Costa Rican business visa for me, so it was real easy for me to come and go from Costa Rica anytime I wanted to because of the type of visa I had. Over the next several years, back and forth, Honduras, the airport at Ilopango, El Salvador, of course, Costa Rica. I ran into pilots who were flashing DEA credentials or CIA credentials, claiming they were flying food and weapons to the Contras. And then they would talk about flying drugs back to the U.S. into Maine, Arkansas, and Florida. A good example of that, by the way, if you haven't watched it, the movie American Made, the movie about Barry Seals, who was the pilot who got caught, and he was doing that, flying supplies one way, flying drugs the other way. I always thought those were false credentials that were being flashed to me. I suspect that they may have been contract employees like I was, but they weren't employees with IDs. I told Siegel about this, the drug smuggling, and all the evidence that I built up on these guys. And he says, no, he says, you're not a cop. We're not interested in that. We want to know where the guns are coming from. So running around northern Costa Rica and border with Bruce Jones. In fact, in Life magazine, February 85 issue of Life magazine, is a whole article on Bruce Jones and his running around in the border there. So I was running around with him. And one day we're with this ragtag so-called army of Contras. They look like a joke to me. I couldn't believe that this was a CIA operation. But I saw these crates of AK-47s, and on the markings on the crate were Arabic. And so I busted up one crate. I told Bruce that, hey, I need this crate. I'm going to, in fact, his wife had given me a rug. I said, I'm going to pack that rug up and ship it home. He never thought anything of it. So I packed that crate up, but I put the crate busted up in my luggage, flew it home. On one of my meetings with Siegel, I turned it over to him, and he very pleasantly surprised. Apparently I hit the nail on the head for what he was looking for. Those weapons turned out to be part of Ollie North's operation called Tipped Kettle. And that was an operation. In 1983, Israel transferred the Contras 300 metric tons of weapons and ammunition. They did it again in 84, 100 containers full, $30 to $40 million worth of guns donated by the Israelis in return. Now, what Israel wanted was increased military assistance in what they were doing in fighting the Arabs. So all this underhanded stuff going on. CIA is not telling the State Department what it's doing. CIA is not telling the CIA what it's doing. We had a bombing in Costa Rica in 1984, and it was an attempt on leader Pastora. And after that happened, Siegel said, you need to get out. You've done your job. Shit's going to hit the fan, was his words. So he wanted me to disappear. He wanted me to be unable to be contacted by the news media and by politicians who are looking to discredit the Reagan administration. So with a girlfriend, I sailed from San Francisco, a different boat now, sailed from San Francisco to the Sea of Cortez. So we lived 85 through the spring of 86 in the Sea of Cortez, Mexico, just hanging out, staying away from everybody. I wasn't contacting anybody. What a great life. After a while, that got old. I went up to Northern California where I bought a little ranch, hung out there for a while, but wasn't hearing from anybody, staying away from friends and family. So I started going back to San Jose, but that's when CIA operative Hassenfuss got shot down. Now, Hassenfuss was a crew member on these planes flying food and supplies into the Contras, and then, I don't know what Hassenfuss was flying back, but he was shot down. He was caught by the communists. He was captured. That hit the news, and shit hit the fan, so to speak, because the whole Reagan thing, the whole Ollie North thing, everything's exposed. the Christic Institute started looking for me. Most people don't know who the Christic Institute was. It was a public interest law firm, and they had represented the cases in Silkwood and involving 3 Mile Island, health issues dealing with nuclear facilities. But for some reason, they were really interested in nailing the CIA and the Reagan administration on this whole Iran-Contra thing. Office of Maxine Waters was after me. Some guy from her office was trying to track me down, leaving messages, trying to call. Gary Webb. Gary Webb was a reporter who wrote a book called Dark Alliance. And in that book, stirred a lot of controversy because he suggested that the CIA was aware of drug trafficking by its contract employees. So in 87, I testified at a closed-door hearing before a Senate subcommittee. Interesting, one side of that table only wanted to know about government assets running drugs, which I testified I had no direct knowledge of. They were looking for intel to discredit the Reagan administration. No one wanted to ask questions about Israel's involvement. I guess politically it was a sensitive topic for both sides of the aisle. 88, State Department set me up with the Office of International Criminal Justice, University of Illinois. And they had established a program with the Soviet Ministry of Interior so law enforcement could go over there and exchange ideas and visit and kind of work with Soviet law enforcement. So I, official cover, of course, under that program that the Soviet Union had set up, I worked with Soviet narcotics officers all over Russia. Leningrad, Moscow, Ukraine, the border of Turkey. Now this was before the fall of the Iron Curtain. This was still the Soviet Union. What I saw was a low economic status for all citizens over there. It is a poor, broken country. An example, we went by, they wanted to show me Gump's department store. I think it was called Gump's. And there was a long line of people waiting. It's a big department store, like we would see a Macy's or something. But there was a big line to get in. And so they said, we're not going to get in. Too big a line. So one of the guys, though, one of the Soviet police officers, everyone was plain clothes, jumped out, ran up to find out what was going on in the store. Excuse me there. He came back and said, everyone's in line. The store has shoes. That's all it has today, shoes. And everyone's buying shoes. And I noticed a big crowd of people off to the side where people would come out of the store and join that crowd. And they explained to me, you go into the store, once you get in line, you go into the store, you go to the counter, you buy a pair of shoes, they give you a pair of shoes, regardless of what size you wore. Then you went outside to the crowd and you started changing and bidding to trying to find someone who had a pair size you wanted. And it was a ridiculous system. It was falling apart. The police officers, we went to drug-related crimes. I mean, I would say, okay, come on, guys, let's do something. Let's do some police work. And so all they wanted to do was eat and drink. But I said, we went to a meth lab. As soon as they said, meth lab, yeah, we know where one's at. I'm like, well, come on, let's go see a meth lab. So we raided meth labs. We visited drug rehab programs. We went to the scene of drug violent crimes. But none of the police officers, whether it be uniformed or the detectives, wanted to make an arrest. And their supervisors didn't get involved. The attitude over there was, we pretend to work, and they pretend to pay us. And I just saw I didn't know it at the time. I had no idea that we were months away from the wall falling. But I could see why. I came home from the Soviet Union, though. I came home from behind the Iron Curtain. If the Soviet Union cannot control illegal drugs, then how are we in the U.S. living in freedom ever going to solve the war on drugs? In '89, again, through the Office of International Criminal Justice, the State Department sent me to China, Beijing, Shanghai, Chengdu, Tibet, which is a great place if you ever get a chance to go. It's not a tourist spot. There's no five-star hotels. It's a great place to visit. State Department wanted boots on the ground to observe not only the drug problem in China, but they wanted visual confirmation of Chinese troops in Tibet. This was at a time China was pretty much denying that they had troops in Tibet. So yeah, I was able to track down troops, take pictures of them, the old secret stuff, hide the film, and but on the drug issue, in the big cities, I would talk to businessmen, and they'd say, there's guys who use cocaine and amphetamines on the job to stay awake, long hours, business, stuff like that. But on the streets, I saw no evidence of drug use or drug abuse in China. None. China does not condone criminal behavior, period. And crime is dealt harshly. Right? Drug trafficking carries a death sentence. While I was over there, they invited me to an execution of some drug dealers. And no, I didn't need to see that. An interesting side note here, China's prisons kind of run like the military. Everyone is up early. You go to breakfast. Everyone works at the company. By the way, every prison in China is a company. China, the government, does not give any money to a prison. The prison warden is really running a company. And in Chengdu, the prison I went to had a 12-foot wall with a single strand of barbed wire on top, and that was it. Could have easily escaped. Problem with China is the way they control everything. You can't just show up somewhere and start living. I mean, it would be hard to be on the run in China. And the third offense, of course, trying to escape from prison is the death penalty. So everyone works. Everyone works. At lunchtime, they played recreational games like softball. Then back to work. They'd have dinner together. Then everyone went to classes in the evening. Everyone. And when I asked about what kind of classes, the answer I got in the broken translation was basically civics, how Chinese government works. How your officials become officials, how laws are made, why you need to obey the law, why we do this. Just basic civics. There was no hanging around the yard, no lifting weights, no reading in the library, no playing cards. Everybody worked. And the success of that company where they were working depended on the quality of the food they ate, the clothes they wore. It was I like that concept. I can already hear people saying, "Oh, that's prison labor, slave labor." Well, I don't know. You committed a crime. You're paying for that crime. What? I don't understand what the big deal is. Go to work. So law enforcement is serving honorably in the war on drugs. All our law enforcement officers, local, state, DEA. I think it's a failed policy, though. Drugs today are cheaper. They're more available. They're stronger, more lethal than they were when the war on drugs was declared in '71. In today's environment, besides the normal trauma, police, firefighters, military soldiers, they live with an additional stress caused by their superiors who throw them under the bus for political reasons. No, we could bring up, not to get into politics, but we could bring up what happened with politicians and chiefs of police in Minneapolis. Recently, Karen Bass in LA and the conflict with the firefighters there. I picture the loved ones of people who died during Prohibition, alcohol prohibition. People who died either because of the bad booze they were forced to drink if they were going to drink booze. They died because of the violence, warfare. I picture them hugging each other back then when Prohibition was lifted and saying, why? Why did we have alcohol prohibition to begin with? And after Vietnam, loved ones of those who were killed or wounded when that war was over had to ask why. Hold each other and say, why? Why did we have that war to begin with? Especially now that we know that they knew it was a failed policy. Someday I expect that the loved ones of those who've died in the war on drugs, not only the drug addicts, but police officers killed and raids have gone wrong and shootings, civilians, as I said, they're going to hold each other and say, why? Why did we have this war on drugs? And the stress, not only the soldiers, police officers, firemen, how do you live with that stress? How do you deal with it? I became active in the drug courts. When I was all done with the State Department and all that, I became pretty active in drug courts and developed a 13-week program. And it came more from a cognitive point of view than, say, an AA. In fact, I got a lot of static from AA, from a program. But, you know, I come from the point of view, what if one thought could make your day, or if one thought could make your week? How about if one thought could forever transform the quality of your life? Because what does stress do? It keeps us from being happy. And that's what we want. Most people think that their life results from their circumstances, what's happened to them. And sadly, this is true for most people. My life is this because of that, and this because of that. I believe that if we could know intellectually, but also experientially, that we are the creators of our reality, is transform the quality of our life. As I said, happiness, stress, and trauma get in the way of happiness. Aristotle wrote over, 2,300 years ago, 2,400 years ago, Aristotle wrote that happiness is the ultimate purpose of human existence. Happiness is the only thing we desire for its own sake. In other words, the objective of happiness is happiness. How do we define happiness? We know it when we feel it. Joseph Campbell described happiness as feeling the rapture of being alive. But how do we achieve lasting happiness, especially when we've been through the stress and trauma that our jobs as military men, firefighters, and police officers have had? We don't even know who we are. We ask people who they are and they give us our business card. Or today they refer us to their Facebook page. We do not find happiness. We think it's where we live. It's the job I have. Ask someone who they are. Well, I got this job on the police force, or I'm a fireman for this county, or they think their happiness depends on their position, where they live. I have this home in this neighborhood. I have this job, and I'm happy. But that, of course, doesn't last very long, because pretty soon you get settled into that, that group of friends, that job, and pretty soon, well, if I could just get that promotion to captain, if I could just get that promotion, I'd get enough money and I could live in that neighborhood. That'll make me happy. So we think happiness is having goals of having and doing. Not it. We're all in search for happiness. We would like to forget. We're anxious, worried, angry, frustrated, depressed, unhappy, and we'd like to forget those stressful and traumatic moments. Plenty of, we grow up with this. The advertisements on TV, on the newspaper, and now on the internet, that there is a substance out there we can take that'll make us feel better, make us happy. You look at the advertisements on TV trying to get you to ask your doctor about this drug, and and everybody seems so happy. Kids grow up seeing this, by the way. They see, hey, there's something I can take that'll make me feel better. Of course, we can go to a therapist. Out of all the diagnoses, they'll certainly find something that ails you. Neurodevelopment disorders, psychotic disorders, dissociative disorders, gender dysphoria, personality disorders. I think, though, when we start looking at therapy, the therapist relies on our memory of behaviors and our memory of events that are getting in our way of happiness. So the therapist is relying on our memory of the trauma, the stress that's getting in our way. See, the problem is we cannot describe what is happening because it's already happened once you try to describe it. You can't even describe what happened in your life. You can only express your memory. You can only express your memory of what happened. And our memory of what happened is not the same as what happened. We all remember the gist of an event. We forget some details. We'll fill in those details with commonly held beliefs based on other experiences. We forget a particular detail for the simple fact that we need to be right, but our memories are chock full of errors. When I was teaching law enforcement report writing classes, at the beginning of the class, I'd be at the very first session of the class, we'd be going through some of the basic classroom requirements and stuff like that. But I would arrange for a couple to burst into the classroom up front, arguing and fighting, and one pushed the other one. And then they were supposed to act surprised, like, whoops, we didn't know there were people in this class, and they would leave. And I'd say something like, what the heck was that about? I'd look into the hallway, and they're gone. So I'd go back to my class. The last 10 minutes of that class, though, I'd go, pull out a piece of paper. You witnessed an event, write it down. You just witnessed a crime. Write what happened. And it's amazing how different those memories were. They all saw the same event, but their memories would be different. And some would actually see a more violent act than what happened. But the purpose of that was to show students, when they become police officers, that you need to be wary of witness statements. You take witness statements, but don't take them as the absolute truth. In fact, I used to teach, if you have 3 witness statements and they are all identical in what they saw and heard, then you know they colluded. You wouldn't see it the same. Our reality is not what happened. Our reality is our memory of what happened. It's like driving down of course, people focus on the past, though. They focus on that. That's why they're unhappy. They're focusing on the stress, the trauma, the events that happened, the things that were done to them. Most people are going down life's highway, not with their hands on the steering wheel, but they're going down life's highway with their hands on the rearview mirror, traveling down the highway of life. And then we wonder why we have so many accidents in our personal, family, social, and work life. It reminds me of a story. Years after Vietnam, I think it was 25 years after Vietnam, a guy I hadn't seen in 25 years, we met and started bringing up memories. And he believed that a mutual classmate named Charlie had died. He had believed that. He believed that Charlie died, leaving behind a wife and a kid. And he had believed that for 25 years. And I go, no. Charlie, here, I pull out my phone. Here's where he lives. Here's his phone number. Here's his email address. Contact him. As an example, his reality. Now, that's a narrow slice of his reality, but still, it's an example of how your reality, based on a false memory, can affect your life. Though that many years later, he was still sad that Charlie had died and left behind a wife and a kid. I like to use an example. Again, this work I did in this area about cognitive and memory and your life was written for people at the level of people that are in drug court. It's not the best way to articulate it, but picture two students studying for exams, and they're sitting under different trees on campus, and they happen to be orange trees, and they're alone, no one to interact with, and 10 feet above them is a quarter-pound orange that falls and strikes them on the head. Equal force. One of the students gets annoyed. He moves out from under the tree. That student's reality of that event is negative. While the other student laughs, and they move to a spot where they assure themselves they won't get hit again. Well, that student's reality of that event is certainly more positive. The event of an orange falling and striking a student with a specific force, that's science. It's math and physics. We can duplicate it on paper, in a lab, or under the same tree. A quarter-pound orange falling 10 feet will hit with the same force every time we try it. 2 + 2 is 4. 2 molecules of hydrogen mixed with molecule of oxygen is going to give us water every time. That is science. But what is not science? We can't predict on paper in a laboratory. We can't predict what the two students' reactions would be. We can spend hours in psychoanalysis and therapy. We can refer to the DSM. It can never be predicted with any accuracy what one person will choose to think and how they will react. I like to use the example of 2 accountants going to work, and while at a red light, they're together in the car in the rear seat, and someone's driving them, and they get rear-ended by a 3,000-pound vehicle moving at 10 miles an hour. The force they're hit with, the damage to their car, can be predicted and replicated in a laboratory. A 3,000-pound vehicle moving at 10 miles an hour with no external forces is going to hit with the same force every time. There are court-recognized forensic experts in the field of accident reconstruction who, given the same circumstances, can predict the resultant force and damage. We cannot predict or replicate, though, the reaction of the occupants. One of the occupants will jump out and start screaming and yelling at the other driver, how the hell did you not see us? Look at the damage. Now I'm late for my meeting. The other occupant gets out, and she's concerned with ensuring that no one was injured. And then she wants to make sure that the car is moved out of the road so that the traffic can get moving again. Because the other driver wants it left right there. He wants the police to see what happened. Out of one event, though, 2 completely different realities. They get back to the office, and the secretary hands Tom, the guy, a note that's saying, oh, by the way, your appointment this morning was canceled because this reason and that reason. So Tom had been angry, fretting, and stewing over a meeting that never occurred. There's people are going to say, yeah, but he thought he missed a meeting. No, that's my point. It's all thought. He didn't miss a meeting. He just thought he missed a meeting. And I know we're talking about innocuous events here, an orange car, minor traffic accident. But as police officers, EMS personnel, firemen, soldiers, we've had serious circumstances in life that need to be dealt with. We've all witnessed and experienced violence in some form, fired from a job, divorce, death of a loved one, death of a co-worker. Your memory, though, of those circumstances is influencing your happiness. You choose how to think about those memories. It's your decision. Any thoughts as we're going along here?
Yeah, no, I've just been sitting. You've just been so fluid in your storytelling. There's no point me even jumping in. Well, the first thing I kind of want to go on the individual and their thoughts and their ownership, and then the environment as well. But one thing that has really kind of come to light over 1,000 conversations now, whether it was father in your case, whether it was grandfather in a lot of the cases of the guests, is how often World War II veteran, at that time, parents, grandparents were actually struggling. And we gave this whole facade of they just came back and they rolled up their sleeves and they were fine. They were cut from a different cloth, and they were human beings as well. And I can't help but feel like that unaddressed trauma, because I believe that trauma can be processed and absolutely become a strength. There's no question. Post-traumatic growth is a real thing. But if it's buried and now you won't even allow that generation to be vulnerable and speak openly because you've said, well, don't say anything because you're the greatest generation. I feel like that's now one of the, and it may have gone way prior to that, but certainly from that point, we've got the dominoes that then fall, to my parents' generation and then my generation. And then we have this multi-generational trauma, not excuses, but reasons. Is that when we look back, we have to acknowledge some of these things, what our upbringing was like, what our parents' upbringing was like. So you talked about your father, not going to combat, but I'm assuming obviously he had, friends and generations that did. What is your observation as far as going, 80 plus years back, as far as the origin story of some of these mental health challenges that have created this generational trauma?
Well, I don't know. My mind may have understood that a little differently than you directed it at me, but I see, we tried to hide it. World War II vets, they called it shell shock, I think, and they just didn't talk about it. And today we talk about it a lot. Therapy is a big business. And my problem, though, with that therapy is, for most parts, that type of therapy, is that we're rehashing memories. And as I just kind of discussed earlier, our memories aren't always correct. And so we keep rehashing them, and they become hardwired. And that just keeps, that circuit just keeps running of that memory that has given us the stress that continues to hang on from these traumatic experiences.
But see, what's interesting is having all these conversations, again, understanding that multi-generational trauma is definitely a thing, that there are struggles that, then create a household that might be domestic abuse or, sexual abuse or alcoholism or just, one or both parents leaving or the child not feeling loved, whatever that person's experience is. But up until very, very recently, the solutions were really, you can drug the person. And like you said, you can sit down and talk about it over and over and over and over again. But now, as so many other kind of options have emerged, I think this is what's exciting about this mental health conversation is, yeah, you can do talk therapy, absolutely. Or you can do EMDR, or you can do a diving retreat, or you can get an animal, a therapy dog, for example. or you can do ayahuasca or ibogaine or MDMA led counseling. So now some of these ones outside of the traditional or non-traditional, depending on how you look at it, talk therapy and medications, you're getting away from that repetitive, conversation over and over again. What's bothering you? What's bothering you? What's bothering you? And you're leaning into health, time in nature, community, even some of these psychedelics, maybe unlocking some things that were deep in your mind that you weren't aware of. So this is why I think that we're starting to see now a kind of renaissance when it comes to the treatments available and the options for people, because there's a lot of people that we've lost because they thought talk therapy was the only thing, or the meds, and it simply didn't work. And probably, like you said, one of the reasons was you're rehashing the same thing, and either that just revisiting isn't it working, or it's slowly morphing as you're telling it, versus actually getting outside, actually being amongst other people, having the ability to truly be vulnerable, maybe through some sort of medication that's taking you out of yourself, like MDMA. So I think, this interesting perspective that you have does align with a lot of the successes that we're seeing outside of the traditional counseling and psychiatric meds.
Well, there's a big movement on all of that, and I'm certainly not, while I've been a federal and state court recognized expert in drugs and narcotics, I'm not, and was never really up to speed on the hallucinogenics. But what they're doing today in that field, the treatment they're doing today in that field, and I've talked to military guys, special forces. These treatments are not new, but they're finally being accepted. We got the whole University of Texas here, just up the street in Austin, has a big department that's studying the use of psychedelics in mental health care. But it's still, though, you're still fighting hardcore older politicians who don't want to even have a discussion about legalizing, even for medical reasons, a lot of these substances.
You talked about alcohol prohibition. This is something I was educated with a few years ago. There's a guy, Johan Hari, that wrote a book called Chasing the Scream. And he does such a great job of talking about the very beginning in the 30s of drug prohibition. But you just underlined it perfectly. The end of alcohol prohibition, people were like, oh, thank goodness, because we had people like Al Capone that were terrorizing people back then and profiting off the, putting people that want to drink into the underworld's hands. That ends, oh my goodness, I'm forgetting on his name now. God, what is his name? Anyway, it'll come to me in a moment. The next person who's kind of put in that position as far as a government role is a screaming racist and has to justify his job. And that's really the birth of, drug prohibition and the Reaper madness and all these other things. And then as you talk about, there are other chapters as you move through the decades where it gets worse and worse. I come into the first responder profession, like boots on the ground in 2004, farm boy from England, moved to America. Now I'm in the urban setting, watching the prostitution and the homelessness and the overdoses and the gang membership and the violence. And over, a 14-year career in my specific example, it's just undeniable that this is not working. It's not getting better, like you said. I hear so many of my law enforcement guests say the moment you take someone off a street corner, the next, there's not even another one that replaces it. Now you create a gang war, and then ultimately someone replaces it, so more people die. So as we progress through, and then my mother, who moved to Portugal about 22 years ago, told me what they did over there, and they decriminalized addiction, not smuggling, not selling, but the addicts they put in the hands of the medical community, and they also gave it the funding and the support for mental health counseling, drug creation, addiction counseling, job creation, housing. So they did it properly, not piecemeal like places in the northwest have tried, and you see it works. And then you hear about our war fighters that literally go overseas, fight for this country, and then have to go to another country to get, as you said, some of the psychedelic therapies that are working. all these pieces start to come together, and you're like, why are we not having this discussion? Why are we not talking about the 80-year longitudinal study on drug prohibition and how it hasn't made things better? It's made things so much worse.
Well, you cannot have the conversation if you're in law enforcement. There are agencies where if you do a public talk like we're doing, or discussion, and even bring up the topic of legalization, you'll be fired. You'll be fired. My boss in San Jose, Joe McNamara, he helped me with my my MA and my BA at University of San Francisco. And he had come up from New York, rose through the ranks, and then became chief of police of San Jose. And he couldn't admit it at the time, but he had already written a thesis on the failure of the war on drugs, but he couldn't even produce the paper. He couldn't have it published. He couldn't publicly, and he helped me a heck of a lot. But he never was able to come out and tell me his point of view until when I came back from living in the Caribbean, and he found out I was stateside now for good. He got a hold of me, and he was at the Hoover Institute. So Joe Mack and I worked together for almost 20 years on this field. And so there are people today, Judge Jim Gray, who will speak out. Milton Friedman was a big fan of, advocate of legalizing drugs. But, you go back to the politics of it. You go back to marijuana. Marijuana was initially fought against by Randolph Hearst, because Hearst owned huge amounts of forest to make newspaper paper. And he didn't want the competition from the hemp industry. So he was the first to go to Congress and fight for, donate money toward the cause of making all forms of hemp and marijuana illegal. And then you had Anslinger to try to justify it. He goes and says, people using marijuana are just blacks and Mexicans, and I forget. I got somewhere in my notes I've got the quote, but and everybody, and then they make this movie Reefer Madness, which I saw as black and white. I don't know what age I was, but and it's such a joke as to what the reality is. But the politics and trying to get people to change their mind, it's the same issue with the psychedelics today. But what we're doing today. What we're doing today in the United States, I want to get back to Portugal, by the way, because I was just over there. I saw no outwardly evident evidence of a drug problem in Portugal. Not like I could go to Austin and point it out to you real quickly, the evidence of drug prohibition. But a point I want to make here is people prefer their mind-altering substances in the milder form. If it's legal, they'll take it in the mildest form. Beer, wine, it's the most commonly used way of drinking alcohol. When we drink liquor, how do most people drink liquor? In a mixed drink, or they sip it. Is our alcohol policies, are they perfect? No. But it's much better it's much better than prohibition. During alcohol prohibition, we had hard, adulterated booze that killed. My grandfather, when he was 26 years of old, got so drunk on adulterated booze that he laid in a ditch all night in the winter, and he died from bad booze and prohibition. Black market drives dealers to so you want it in the milder form. Go to Bolivia. You can use cocaine there. How do they use it? They chew on the leaves. When cocaine was legal here in the States, we used it the same way we use caffeine today. It was in drinks and things like that.
It was Coca-Cola, wasn't it?
You make caffeine illegal in the States today, and pretty soon on the black market, you'll be able to buy tablets, big tablets of caffeine. So the black market also, though, it drives dealers to produce and transport their substance in the strongest form. Meyer Lansky and Al Capone weren't bringing in barrels of beer across the Canadian border or over from the Bahamas. No, they were bringing in very hard, Everclear liquor. And Ricky Ross, you know who Ricky Ross was? So Ricky Ross is this cocaine dealer, and he's getting his cocaine from Michael Blanton. Michael Blanton was a operative in Central America, like I was talking about those guys. Blanton was bringing cocaine back. Blanton was giving it to Ricky Ross. Ricky Ross was making millions of dollars selling cocaine. But cocaine in its powder form is hard to carry. It's very water soluble. I mean, if you got sweaty hands and you put a little bit of cocaine on your hand, it'll just go away. It'll just be like magic. It dissolves. So cocaine's hard to carry. It's hard to transport. So Ricky Ross came up with a way of mixing it with baking powder and baking soda. I don't know what he does, but he made it, and it comes out and it's called crack because it's chunks, and it's not water soluble. I can take a chunk of crack and put it in my lip and walk around with, talk to a cop. You got any drugs on you? No, it's into my cheek. A line of cocaine back in my day costs $120. That's expensive for the kids in the hood. But crack, you can chip it off in a $25 dose, which kids in the hood can't afford, and you smoke it. So the war on drugs has brought us crack. It has brought us ice. It has brought us the drugs, fentanyl. And now we got fentanyl. Here's an example of, we know what the problem is with fentanyl, but here's an example of buying drugs that are not pharmaceutically produced. You do not know here in Texas, if you go by Houston, Austin, you can find dealers who will sell marijuana that's been laced with fentanyl.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how do you know that, though? Unless he tells you. And if you're turning around and you're buying some of it and you say, I really got some good stuff, and you start selling it to 18-year-old kids or 16-year-old kids, and they really like it, of course, and then some of that fentanyl that was sprinkled in there is just a little too much, now we got a dead kid. So those are the kind of things. We wouldn't have fentanyl, we wouldn't have crack, we wouldn't have, no. People would take it in a milder form. Is it the perfect answer? No. But in looking for the perfect, we shouldn't underlook the better. And there's a better way to handle the war on drugs than what we're doing. Drugs is before I leave marijuana, one of the biggest claims for how many years marijuana is a gateway drug. Mm-hmm. If you use marijuana, then you're going to start using heroin, gateway. Well, I experienced a gateway drug when I was like probably 6 or 7. I was given some chocolate. I liked chocolate. It tasted good. I know other substances liked it taste good. I wanted more of it. Chocolate for me was a gateway. It was a gateway into more candies, more. Anything can be a gateway. And food can be as worse of addiction as drugs are for some people. It's a whole other topic, but you're eating. But we have 2 types of laws. We have mala in se. This is here we go again, another poof. Latin. Mala in se and mala prohibita. Mala in se are crimes like drugs that are mala in se, rape, robbery, murder. They're bad in themselves. We all know they're bad. Then we have mala prohibita. And those are laws only bad because we say so. There is nothing inherently wrong with most mala prohibita laws. Seatbelt laws, which, by the way, when a police officer, when they started that crap, I stood up in briefing and said, this is bullshit. Citing people for not wearing a seatbelt, that's between them and their insurance company. We have no, and we were told, no. It's if you have, for example, if you're at the scene of a traffic accident and someone was injured and obviously one of the drivers didn't have a seatbelt on, then you can write a ticket for it. But I was like, bullshit. That's not what's going to evolve, though. And today, you will be stopped and cited for not wearing a seatbelt. But there is nothing inherently wrong with not wearing a seatbelt. Trying to think of some other examples real bad. Seatbelt laws, gambling.
Well, loitering was put in around the same time, where all of a sudden, people were ending up in prison that were literally just standing in, in a public place.
I don't know if we still have loitering anymore, but anyway, gambling though. So of course, drug use, prostitution, regulated and controlled. There's nothing inherently wrong with them, yet we make them against the law. And that's one of the problems with working undercover. Most of your model prohibited laws, like against gambling and prostitution and drugs and stuff like that, you use undercover officers. And undercover work has so many pitfalls in it. So many pitfalls. It gets, I already mentioned it, there was I'm going to segue off for a second and then we'll come back. In flight school, in your helicopters, and you're learning to fly in formation and you're getting near the end, so you're flying big formations. And all of a sudden there's like 40 helicopters out in this big field and you're all cranked up and you can just feel through your body the thumping of all those rotor blades. And you take off and all those, and you're in formation, and it's a thrill. I get goosebumps now thinking about it. It's an unimaginable thrill, that sound, that noise, that seeing all those other helicopters. And then riding, I did a ride with the Hells Angels from San Jose up to Oakland. And of course, the president of the clubs are riding up front, and then the Hells Angels, and then you have the prospects who have the lower, and I became a prospect, but you get the lower thing, but you're at the back. But the roar of those Harley Davidsons and the vibrations you get from all of them around you, that all in synchrony, and you're riding down the freeway and riding down the street, and pretty soon the lines begin to blur between what you're really supposed to be doing. Yeah, it was interesting. Marijuana, back to marijuana. The National Library of Medicine. They've posted studies that conclude that most marijuana intoxicated drivers show only a modest impairment on an actual road test. Now, I've done these actual road tests with alcohol, where we had the big, at San Jose State University, a big parking lot, and they test you. I think there were like 15 of us, and they tested us to make sure we were alcohol-free. Then we did this drug test. You're driving in cones, and these temporary stoplights come in, and light will come up at the last minute, and you stop, and then you go and you back in, and you do this kind of a drug test, and then they give you a drink. They get you up to, usually one drink would get you up to about 0.03. And then they get you at 0.06. Then they get you at 0.08. And after, of course, once they know you're at 0.03, you drive the test again. Once you're at, and everybody, about 0.06, you start showing a decline in your driving skills. By the time when I did that test, it was 0.10 in California. The legal limit. And the test we did, we could all see the results of it afterwards. Of course, it's all being filmed. CHP was filming it all on it, so you could see that there was impairment. But marijuana smokers who drive on a set course show almost no functional impairment under the influence of marijuana, except when it's combined with alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
The problem of driving under the influence is alcohol.
You know what's interesting as well, as this sleep medicine kind of conversation and the studies have really come to light the last 10 years or so, one of the stats that's always talked about is 24 hours without sleep is the same as having a blood alcohol of 0.1, which you can imagine, like you said, was probably a cohort of university students that were usually in their beds, maybe some late nights on weekends, and then do this 24-hour sleep study, and they do probably the same kind of test that you did or cognitive test. But now you think about a firefighter or a cop, certainly in my profession where it's 24 hours, a lot of times with disrupted or no sleep for 10, 20, 30 years. At what point, at what cognitive comparable alcohol content, or are people driving around because of the shifts that are forced on them? And then now with this recruitment crisis, all this mandatory overtime that's forced on them. And we see these intersection wrecks and getting lost in fires and pushing the wrong medication and, being too aggressive or shooting the wrong person. And there's never a conversation of the element of rest and recovery and how that affects our cognition.
Yeah, luckily, I guess, or at least I don't remember. With memories again, a problem where I was so tired that I felt it interfered. But it had to, my first night back to work was on a Sunday when I worked patrol. I preferred, because that gave you all day, it gave you most of the week off. I had Monday off, Tuesday off, Wednesday off, and almost all of Thursday. So I could do I had other income jobs to do. And so you go back that first night, you're up all day Sunday, and then you're up all night, and 3, 4 in the morning, you're getting tired. But I can't. I'm sure I'd like to see a study like that where they get people, doing the same kind of drive. It'd take a lot longer to do it. But this idea, which I've been reading, well, I probably read it about on some of your stuff. We're going to a 24 on, 72 off.
Yes, sir.
Sounds like a pretty good deal. I don't know how we could do that how that can be done with law enforcement. The 10-4 plan works pretty good. I think I think a good training program on how to make better use of your time and get better sleep under a 10-4 plan. A course could be taught that would, and if they followed it, of course, would be worth having a course developed like that.
Yeah, yours is a tricky community, the same as corrections and dispatch and the ER, and obviously, as we see the corporate space moving to 4-day work weeks, 32-hour weeks, and having the same level of efficiency and production, all those things, I think maybe questioning, for the people that life and death, is in their hands. Do we need them to be working 40 hours? Is there an opportunity to give our frontline personnel that work 12s or 10s a little bit more rest and recovery in between? And then if you are having a recruitment crisis, figure out what you are doing wrong so these people aren't being forced to work more and more shifts. And then, the pay is the other thing. A lot of these people in first responder professions, as you mentioned, have a second job, not because they've dreamed of working 2 jobs, it's because it's a necessity to pay a mortgage in the area that they live. So I think, ours is like, let's stop working 56. It's a pretty, obvious thing to me, even though it's been such a fight to get that out there. But, when you get down to when we're talking about 40-hour work week for law enforcement, is like, okay, well, then it's still a rest and recovery issue. And I think the other thing is we are more resilient where we're younger. So maybe early in the career, those are the ones that tend to work more of the night shifts. And then as you progress and you mature and you earn your place, then you start transitioning to the ones where you're working in the day. Because there's no question, when I was first in the fire service, it bothered me a lot less than when I got into my 40s working these shifts. So I think there are some opportunities to explore that in law enforcement. But if the corporate space is moving to a 32-hour work week, maybe the men and women with guns on their hips or, working on people in the trauma bay and the ER, maybe they need some more rest and recovery too.
Yeah, my experience with law enforcement, and I stayed pretty active in all this, in the consulting and the testifying in court and working with Joe McNamara, right up until about the time, number one, Joe passed away, and that was also the same time period when my wife of 30 years passed away. And so all my when she got diagnosed, it was when it started, of course. Like, I was no longer able to do the traveling that I was doing, because I used to speak, whether it be Rutgers or Hastings School of Law in California, or University of Chicago. I was speaking all over the nation, and or testifying in court cases all over the nation. So that came to a stop when Sally got diagnosed. I became a caretaker. And I never got back into it. But up to that time, up until about 2010, I was active in associating with, working with large police departments. And the pay, I never found the pay to be an issue with any police officers of the departments I was hanging around. Even back in my day, the pay was not an issue. I worked extra jobs just because, number one, I loved real estate. I loved building homes. One thing about building homes was when I built a home, I could stand back and say, wow, I did this. I built this. There is nothing in law enforcement where you stand back and go, wow, I did this. Yeah. Yeah. It's a different, it's so I never found too much of a problem, but what I'm finding today, or what it sounds to me like today, it's not, they're having a hard time finding police officers, but not because of the pay. It's because, and too many times, law enforcement officers are thrown under the bus, and they say it's not worth it. This is not a field I want to work in anymore. So they're leaving law enforcement, or they're just not going into it. They're like, why the hell? You try to get an educated minority, African American, to go into law enforcement. You go, well, why the hell would I want to do that? I'm not going to do it. Not here in Austin or San Jose or LA and stuff. It's hard. The job isn't as rewarding as it was, in my opinion. It's just harder to do the job.
One more area, and I want to go to some closing questions, so I'll be mindful of your time. But this ties into what we've been talking about. We've got the, either decriminalize or even legalize, as far as how that will benefit the addicts and how that will help pour resources in and hopefully start healing people. Because, not only is there the people that just simply buy drugs and, aside from that functioning member of society, we also have the ripple effects of addiction causes, robberies and burglaries and all these other things too. But watching, this kind of downward spiral that I've seen, and all the violence, and like I said, the gang membership, and as you alluded to, whether it's the Hells Angels or the Crips or the Bloods or the crack epidemic, it's created so much crime because of the desperation of the people that are suffering, and then the people that are making money from them. And then you look overseas. You talk about Mexico, El Salvador, Colombia, these countries that our illicit drug trade ultimately created a consumer that then empowered, crime even in other countries. And then now we're turning around and saying they're bad people without looking in the mirror and say, hey, our history created this in the first place. So just talk to me about, if you believe this, I believe this. If there was a decriminalization or legalization of addiction, to be clear, not the, again, addicts, not the smugglers, when Portugal has found that they freed up all the resources to then attack those people because they weren't arresting addicts anymore, what would you see as far as the impact of crime within this country, and then also some of the border problems that we're having as far as the wrong people trying to come into this country or the violence in their own country?
Yeah, my BA thesis at University of San Francisco was titled "The Impact of Drug Use on the Crime Index." So I was able to show that so much of our crime and so many of our people in jail were in drug-related crimes, not necessarily the drug itself, but committing burglaries, car theft, scams, shoplifting, because they needed to raise money for the illicit drug. Most of these drugs would be pennies on the dollars if they were legal. And there's you go to the other end of the spectrum of legalization or decriminalization, the other end, which would be hardcore, really stiff enforcement. I'm looking for a word and I can't find it right now. But an example: when someone flew an airplane into a tower and killed thousands of people, we went full strength against that group. We went overseas. If they found one of those guys driving in a car, we'd take it out with a drone. We'd find a house where the guy who planned the whole thing was living, and we took him out. What if we declared war, a real war on drugs, and started using drones overseas and taking out? The heck with trying to just take them out. If someone comes into the country and is spreading fentanyl and it's killing thousands of people, what's the difference between those thousands and the thousands in the tower? Fentanyl kills. It's no different than if you stood and just fired shots randomly into a crowd of people. You're going to kill some people. And that's what we're doing when we're spreading this fentanyl across the country. So if we took the other approach and just said, okay, it's the death penalty, and you're bringing that stuff into our country, you're killing people, we're coming after you, we're going to use drones, and we're going to wipe out your homes, we're going to wipe out the laboratories, we're going to, which would create a hell of an international problem.
That's the problem.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think we're ever going to go hardcore in a fight against the war on drugs. It's just not going to happen. And I'm arguing this middle of the ground stuff would be completely eliminated. No one would be smuggling. No one would be smuggling drugs across the country if we turned, for example, amphetamines over. Well, amphetamines are already made pharmaceutically. I mean, kids take Ritalin. Our military pilots on long missions take forms of amphetamines. So there is it's already in place. So if we made amphetamines much more easier to get, when I was in college, way before the war on drugs, I could go to my doctor and say, "Doc, I got an exam. I really need to cram this weekend. I need some help staying awake." They'd give you a prescription for amphetamines. When DEA started, when they started the war on drugs, and DEA started clamping down on doctors prescribing medications, then it forced everyone to the illegal market. And on that subject, only because it just popped into my head, when the war on drugs started, it took a while, but they started arresting a lot of doctors and nurses. And these are doctors and nurses who were using a morphine-based product on a daily basis. Those doctors and nurses were never caught because of the way they were acting. No one ever said, "Something wrong with that person, let's report him." They were only caught because of an audit of drug supplies. And someone says, "Whoa, our stock is lower than it should be. Someone's dipping into the supply here." It's the same thing when we started. You remember when there was that rash of athletes being kicked off teams or arrested for drug use? Initially, they weren't acting out under the influence of amphetamines or cocaine. They were using it to enhance their performance, which it does, by the way. Amphetamines and cocaine increase your reaction time. They make you more alert. They were caught because of a drug test, not because of the effects of the drugs.
Yeah, and this is my point, is that, like you said, if we can't take drones, and obviously there should be an element of wherever you can addressing the criminals that are at the heart of this, because again, the violence, for example, in Mexico, you can't tell me that some of that isn't forcing people across our borders. So if we're talking about the immigration crisis, air quotes, then what are we doing to undo the mistakes that we've made that are negatively impacting the country? But I think you also supply and demand, if you want to hit them where it hurts, then you heal Americans. I mean, look at the obesity crisis. I mean, there's this whole claim of we're going to make America healthy again. Now, I haven't seen anything about that in the last 6 months, and I haven't seen anything about that in the last 20 years. So it's not about one side or the other. But
Yeah.
when you make Americans healthy again, all this money that we need for education and first responder professions and all these other areas, it's already there. It's proactively investing it in your people. And it's the same with this. If we invest in the mental health of our people, in creating healthy, happy children, all these things that we can do, then, the number of addicts that you will have, whether it's a professional like a doctor or nurse or someone living under a bridge, is going to reduce dramatically. But the problem that we see in this country is they'll point to that one guy it didn't work on and go, oh, you see, it doesn't work. Or they'll do a Seattle model and say, we decriminalized it. It's like, okay, but what did you do to heal people? Oh, nothing. We just don't arrest them anymore. Well, of course, that's not going to work either. So I think this is it. As you said, the middle of the road conversation is there are countries around the world that have done this really well. Portugal has their model. I think Switzerland is one. I believe one of the either South or Central American countries has done really well. So why are we not learning from them and then creating a hybrid model that's even better that we then apply here? But what I know doesn't work is what you saw in your career and I saw in a much shorter career, is sending everyone who's struggling with a mental health issue into the hands of a criminal.
Well, we don't spend any money on it. We don't want to spend any money on it. It's because of our political system. I grew up kind of naive. Up until I got in the Army, I believed that politicians were elected and they were going to do what was best for the country. They had the country's best. And of course, what I now know is, no, a politician has only two things he's interested in. One is getting elected, and one is getting reelected. And that's all they care about. And so they don't go out with these ideas and get sold on them and try to get the public behind them. They listen to what the public says, and then they do it. And the public doesn't want to spend the money on it. They don't want to spend the money. Education, public awareness works. And let me give you a perfect example. Tobacco. Tobacco is the most addicting of all the drugs. In 1970, when we started the war on drugs, the use of tobacco was over 70%. Today, we're down to 13% of the population smokes tobacco. And we did that not by kicking down doors, not by arresting anyone. We did it simply by education and public awareness.
And some pretty brutal PSAs, which worked. The Marlboro Man with a freaking hole in his throat, for example.
Yeah. Sonny, here we go again. The president of the chapter of the Oakland chapter of the Hells Angels. Yeah, what was his name? I arrested him, as you know. Anyway, yeah, he died with one of those terrible. So yeah, the war on drugs needs to be addressed, and I'm not right here today necessarily advocating one way or the other. What I want to do is just get the facts out there. But the war, and I think the facts I've showed is the war on drugs, it's a failure. It would be very hard for anyone to say, because every reason we started the war on drugs has been a failure. We haven't stopped drug use. We haven't stopped drug overdose. We haven't stopped the manufacture. We've accomplished nothing. We've got this whole drug war industrial complex, though, that doesn't want to stop the war on drugs. It's making it, the drug cartels do not want to stop the war on drugs. No, Al Capone and Meyer Lansky didn't want to stop the war, the prohibition, the war on alcohol. So they don't want to stop it. DEA, it's a huge, humongous. Their budgets in the billions. They don't want to stop the war on drugs. It's their job. Drug counselors, it's their job. These court-mandated clients, where I said I had, I set up a program for that, and in my program, it came from the point of view of thought, and it's your thought about things that lead you to be depressed, that lead you to use drugs, or lead you to drink, and AA pretty much had a stranglehold on all those court programs up until that time, and of course they come from the point of view that once you're an addict, you're always an addict. Once an alcoholic, you're always an alcoholic. Hi, my name is John, and I'm an alcoholic. And I came from the point of view, well, that's kind of limiting, branding yourself like that for the rest of your life. And no, you can stand up one day and say, I had a problem, but I'm free and clear of it. But I read so much resistance. But there is so much money in the drug treatment program, the way it's run today. And most, I've taught those classes. I would say the vast majority of those classes are not addicts. They're just people who got arrested, traffic stop. They had a small amount of drugs on them. They got arrested, and what they had to do is go to drug court for 13 weeks. That's what they were, and they pay money to go, and they pay money to the therapist, and they pay money to this. Therapists have a role, but they also don't want to end the war on drugs. So the drug war industrial complex is big and hard to fight against. And you're just, when you're in a nation that's already so far in debt, it's basically broke. Nobody wants to spend money on programs that we know would work. They can't see, they just can't imagine just shutting down, just saying like Trump has done on some other program, just close it down, shut it down, close it out, close DEA down and let the local law enforcement handle it. That would be my first step. And then training and education, and get people's minds right. Why are they using to begin with? There's something wrong in our society where a kid sits down in front of the TV, mom sets them down, give them something to do, get the kid out of their hair. And the kid watches TV and he's watching these advertisements about how if you take this drug, you're going to feel better, you'll be happier. And then we wonder why they get in high school and they start buying drugs. This will make you happier. This will make you feel better. I don't say that you can, with a cognitive approach and the way I write about it in my book, I don't say that you can prevent sad, troubling, negative thoughts, because they will occur. Those thoughts of stress and trauma will come up. But when you realize that you're the source of that thinking, you can nip it in the bud. You can change it. I catch myself all the time. I'll start to think about something, and I'll just say, "Hey, stop it," and just, there is. You had a good sentence for it. There is value in those stressful situations, as hard as it might find. And a powerful example for me was growing up, because of my age. I grew up with kids my age whose parents had that tattoo on their arm. Holocaust survivors.
Yeah.
One particular family from Poland. When I was middle-aged, when my mom got to the point where we had to put her in assisted living for a while, there was a large group of Holocaust survivors at that assisted living home. And I sat at the lunch table many occasions and talked to them. And a lot of them carried a lot of bitterness and resentment, and understandably so. But I met many who, despite what they experienced in the concentration camps, they were happy. They had found meaning and joy in life. They still believed in the goodness of mankind. And these people focused on rebuilding their lives, finding joy in their family and their community, and making the world a better place. They stayed focused on the future. In other words, they were driving down the highway. Once they got out of that, they were released from the camps, wherever country they went to, the United States. They got back to life. They got their hands on the steering wheel, and they focused ahead. They were not looking in the rearview mirror all the time, like a lot of them were. Eddie Jacku, he survived the Holocaust and dedicated the rest of his life to promoting kindness, tolerance, and resilience.
Amazing man.
He proclaimed himself the happiest man on earth. And the difference between those two groups is, along that continuum, is how they chose to think about it and what they chose to like. What was the movie true story of Holocaust survivor Rubino Solomoni, Life is Beautiful. That's a great movie. He keeps a good attitude because his son was also in that camp through the whole experience. So who we are, everything about us is the result of thought. And we can, the one thought that can change the quality of your life is the idea that you control your thoughts.
Absolutely. Well, I know you have a couple of books, Just One Thought and then Honorable Intentions. So for people listening, give them a kind of overview of each, and then where can they find them?
Yeah, Honorable Intentions is my life story. And of course, the conclusion is failed policies, failed policy of Vietnam, failed policy of the war on drugs. And that's Honorable Intentions by Russell Jones. My full name is Robert Russell Jones. Only the IRS usually uses it. But the other book that I've used in my court stuff is called Just One Thought, and that's by Robert Russell Jones.
Brilliant.
And that book deals with the stuff I was talking about here, how I give examples of how we use thought in our lives and then how it affects us, how we're wrong. Our memories are wrong. They really are. We can get all worked up about that divorce, but you really stop and think about it. There's some roles that we played in the divorce. We want to be bitter with the spouse, but there's roles we played, and we need to remember those. We tend to want to shut them out. It's a short book, very interesting, but short. I think they'd like it.
Brilliant. And where can they find those?
Amazon. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Amazon.com. Honorable Intentions by Russell Jones.
Brilliant. Well, I want to thank you so much. It's been such an amazing conversation. Truly, I could talk to you for another 2 hours, no problem. There's so many other things from your past that I'd love to unpack, and maybe we'll do a part 2 down the road. But just everything, that the perspective that you've had with the life story that you have on some of these issues that I truly believe, we can change, we can improve, we can kind of take a step back, whether it's our own personal well-being and mental health, or whether it's advocating for that on a national level. So I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Well, I enjoyed it. It was my pleasure. And I would like to come back. I have, at my age, that's all I have is time. So that's plenty of time.